That's not a joke either. I mean, that is a serious issue. So the point is, all of that gets factored into solar panels cost a lot and people generally don't buy them. I mean, so the way a whole economic system works is that the magnitude and extent and solvability of the problems are reflected in the prices. So they're dealt with by individual ingenuity the way we know the price is like the final answer. And to the extent the government has interfered in the price, it's screwed up the math problem, if you want to carry that analogy. So as much as possible, we want the government out of the equation so it's just doing its job of enforcing the laws, and that way we can always find the best solution.
I feel like an idiot even asking this question because I've seen it a lot lately on some of the things I follow on Facebook, and there's people actually arguing that out west where fracking has been done a lot, I guess, that because of all the fracking that's been going on, there were signs that there was geological instability, or they're calling it, as we would call it, earthquakes.
Oh, seismic events.
Yes.
See, that actually I think one of the more intelligent sort of inquiries to have, but it needs to just be studied scientifically. So I'm not a geologist, but you would need to really investigate. And as you have seen in the papers, every single weather event that occurs or geological event is attributed to global warming. So it's the scientific, all science on this has completely disappeared in terms of media. So I'm inherently suspicious of all of these claims, but there's nothing to say. I can't sort of legislate reality and say that, well, this technology is not going to affect seismic activity. It seems very doubtful, and I can't imagine it would be different from, say, geothermal drilling, which is a lot deeper and sort of more permanent, which environmentalists are supposedly in favor of, although they wouldn't be if they knew what it actually consisted of, because they don't generally like a lot of drilling. But yeah, it should be investigated scientifically, and then it would be a real question if there were some like 0.1% chance of who knows what it is. I mean, let's put it this way, if it were guaranteed to cause an earthquake every time you frack, yeah, you shouldn't be able to frack.
Okay.
But the fact that you hear about it on Facebook and not in the ground,
yeah, I know,
is a sign.
Yeah, but just to say that, isn't that like just not how earthquakes are caused? Like how would that affect tectonic plate movements?
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. So, but again, I don't even know enough about what all these things are. There's a tendency in our culture to try to ridiculously oversimplify the complex. I mean, the whole climate change thing is an example of this, where you've got real questions about how does the greenhouse effect work. There's some plausibility to some theories that, I mean, generally, most people don't know this, but the greenhouse effect is, I mean, more CO2 in the atmosphere leads to a certain amount of warming. But the general pattern is sort of, if this is your line of more CO2, it's what's called a logarithmic graph. So the more you emit, the less of a difference it makes at the higher end. So the lower end makes a difference, the higher end doesn't. Now, which is almost never publicized. This is what the actual greenhouse effect means. Now the theory is that there are other factors beyond the greenhouse effect, which they call positive feedback loops, that instead of this, make it go like that. Now, I think that's very dubious, but what it certainly is not is obvious, and yet people are told all the time to just say, climate change is real, therefore we should ban fossil fuels. So this is like, A, it's this problem, therefore ban it, and B, the problem is this incredibly vague and unscientific, propagandistic way. And that's just a sure sign that you're not dealing with a scientific movement. Anyone who sort of cavalierly talks about banning fossil fuels has no idea what they're talking about in terms of human well-being, because it's a suicide pact. So even if you thought global warming due to fossil fuels was catastrophic, you would be basically crying all day, all the time, and your focus would be on how to mitigate it. Would be like, and certainly through nuclear would be the obvious sort of solution. But it wouldn't be saying, yeah, I hate nuclear plants, I think the world's going to come to an end due to CO2, but we'll make solar and wind work somehow. Yes?
Like how can these people say that fossil fuels are bad and they say that we should get rid of them and replace them with renewable energy that could not even possibly like compare with how much energy given out with fossil fuels. Like, how do they say that we can't have fossil fuels, but they want to live the way that they live with the renewable energy to support them? Like
So
we
there's
live
the question of the leaders and the followers. So the followers don't know anything, so they're just following the lead of the leaders. So if the leaders tell them, yeah, you know, everything in your life, yeah, it'll be the same, except there won't be any global warming. You know, there won't be a catastrophe. That's in part because our educational system teaches us to take everything, to take the fact that we have the most amazing standard of living in human history completely for granted, and to be completely uninteresting in what causes it, namely industrial scale energy, which is primarily fossil fuels. Because of that, they just treat it as like changing a light bulb. So it's, oh yeah, well, you know, we'll take out the coal plants and then we'll put in, and it's just.
It's like they're going backwards, but they expect it to be the same.
Yeah, so now the leaders are interesting, and have any of you guys studied the history of communism? It's a really interesting history because it teaches a lot of lessons about what human motivations are. So Marx, you know, Marx is a leading communist. He's got the Communist Manifesto, and a guy I used to work with who was really smart, he made the point to me once that the communists, the socialists, and the left in general have always been very clear about what they wanted to destroy and very vague about what they wanted to replace it with. So they were very clear that capitalism was evil, you know, that it exploited the workers, blah, 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 blah. And of course, everything has problems, so you can pick on them, especially because capitalism wasn't exactly perfect capitalism anyway. But what they did was they made this jump to, therefore we should have this totalitarian state where everything will be perfect. And Marx said, you know, oh, it'll be totalitarian at the beginning, but then the state will wither away and everyone will be truly free. Now, there was no evidence for this whatsoever. It's about the same evidence as there is for green energy. And yet people believed it with conviction. But what they really believed, they didn't believe that with conviction. What they just really believed was they were convinced that capitalism was wrong, and therefore whatever they replaced it with would have to be right. And then there are certain elements who just want power, and they'll jump on that ideological bandwagon. But you need a kind of general conviction that the existing system is morally wrong. And the left has always been very good at kind of exploiting people's guilt about capitalism and using that to create things that are infinitely worse than the current variant of capitalism. And it's true with energy too, because we're not taught to appreciate energy and to appreciate more broadly the whole human beings developing and transforming the earth and extracting energy from it and engaging in development, because we're not taught to view that as good. And in fact, we're taught to view it as bad, as a footprint, you know, as not being green. It's ripe for attack. And the whole focus of the green movement is not really on what it's going to be replaced with, but just that it's bad, and it's attack, attack, attack. Make yourself feel guilty. And the things that people do, like, you know, they drive a Prius, and it's not, and if you're doing it for economic reasons, that's fine. But it's not that anyone has any clear idea that driving a Prius is really going to prevent global warming. And they don't even know how toxic the battery is, or what's going to happen to where it's going to get thrown afterward, or what processes go into it, or that it's arguably generating more toxicity than it That's not the point at all. The point is just that people feel guilty and they want to assuage that guilt. So we have a whole population that's guilt-ridden about man transforming nature. And so I might have mentioned this, my organization is called Center for Industrial Progress, because I think the key thing is that we have to embrace as an ideal changing the world, transforming the world, which is really what industrial progress is. It's the transformation of nature through energy and technology. And until we regard that as something that's really good and positive, the other side will always have the moral upper hand. But if you regard it as good, even like this, I mentioned this somewhere else, I regard it as good that I'm going to take this and throw it away. No. Because think of what this is. Who knows what this is made of? Oil. Some of you have to see my toilet. Yes, this is just oil. Right? Okay, so it was something that was completely useless. It was under the ground. It was just sitting there. It wasn't doing anything. And now look at what it did. It helped refrigerate, or at least keep cool this water. It allowed me to have a more enjoyable presentation. It did a great job. And now I can throw it away in a place that's someplace that's safe and secure, and it'll be underground. The only difference will be that the same chemical elements will be under the ground, except in my case, they've done a good job, instead of just being left there to do no job. So the only fundamental difference is that human beings have used them to make life better. And yet this is supposed to be something that we apologize for, and we say, oh, well, no, we'll recycle it, or there's probably some, they make them thinner now so that I'm using less oil. But I mean, what is recycling? Like, people have this, what does recycling mean? Recycling means use a bunch of energy to reshape this. So it's still a form of transforming nature. Now, in the case of most of these things, it doesn't make much sense to recycle them. It makes more sense to throw them away. I don't know the case with bottles, but my basic policy with recycling is I recycle if someone besides the government will pay me to recycle. Because that means that, like if I recycle a computer, that means that the components in the computer are worthwhile. But otherwise, why waste precious energy to recycle these things for more energy than it would take to create a new computer? So most of the recycling thing is just more and more guilt, but people not even understanding how resources work. But the point is that you really need to decide in life, are you okay with using the earth for your benefit? Like, you really need to make that, that's like a singular sort of decision that you need to make. And I'm very okay with that. So I call it guilt-free garbage, but it's broader than that, and it's really important, because if you're not okay with changing the earth for your benefit, then you're not okay with how human life works, because we survive by taking an earth that's naturally fairly hostile to us and transforming it into something that's to our benefit, and that's the project, and we should want it to continue so that we can live longer and longer and longer, so that other people can continue to live longer and longer and longer. But the underdeveloped world, or the undeveloped world, that means that's really the green world. That's the world in which people have had a low impact. And what they need to do is make a really big footprint and have a better life. Yes?
Alright, so obviously, like with a lot of the companies that are talking about promoting the green movement, if you just like trace where a lot of the money's going, like Nancy Pelosi's brother-in-law is a huge financial backer in Solar Reserve, one of the companies that got $700 million in that loan grant. Al Gore owns his own carbon credit companies, his own carbon credit company, and all these like water bottles, they've been made with less material, but been used with less material to produce, but the cost to buy them hasn't dropped. So to what extent would you say that this environmentalist movement is more moved by people who have money to gain off it, instead of people who think they actually care and think they're doing good?
Right. I'll answer that, but I need to make a brief commercial break. Sign up for my mailing list. You get awesome stuff on it. It's free, and you can get off at any time. And there's lots more to learn than what we can cover tonight. So that's right there. So your question. I think it's important to not overrate the influence of money. So money is in terms of money and power. I find that people, especially conservatives, often overestimate. So I would say that it's usually the ideas come first, and the money and power follow the ideas. So if you have the idea that it's wrong for man, to tamper with nature, to transform nature, to exploit the earth, all of those things, if you have that idea, then that means that certain human beings need to be prevented from, changing nature, and that some other human beings need to be the ones doing the preventing, right? And there will be certain types of people, like people named Al Gore, who will, for various sort of psychological reasons, be attracted to the position of ordering other people around and telling them what to do. But it's only possible because of the ideological, intellectual framework that's set up. And there's also people like Jeff Immelt at GE who will just say, oh, well, there's money to be made by, by serving as Barack Obama's, what is he, the job czar, and he's like a big client. It's a ridiculous kind of relationship. But there are people who will say, oh, there's money to be made because the people giving the orders, like Al Gore, they're ordering the money in a certain direction, and then I can receive it. So these incentives certainly exist, but and they are a problem and they should be pointed out, but the main thing is to kind of get the ideas out of, those ideas out of the government. So government shouldn't be in the position of dispensing these kinds of green favors. And if they're not, then there's no issue at all. And the analogy I always like to use is you take like Hitler and Nazi Germany. Imagine Hitler, imagine someone with that exact psychology, exact upbringing, exact corruption, exact sort of personal evil grew up in the founding era of America and said, you know, I want to start, you know, a racist dictatorship. He's just going to get kicked out of school and not, I mean, or whatever. He's just going to be, you know, just like a loser who goes down nowhere in history. So in Germany, there is a whole intellectual framework and other kinds of frameworks to make possible the rise of someone like that. And that is something we need to pay more attention to. So whenever you see someone getting power or money, the number one question is, what ideas is he using? Because if you can fight the ideas, then you can fight the person. But you can't fight Al Gore by pointing out how much money he's making. Because they'll say like, well, you know, I need to make money promoting my cause. You can't fight him by saying, oh, you're a hypocrite, you take too many plane trips. Because they'll say, oh, well, I bought a carbon offset. Or he'll say, well, my work is really important. I'm flying around the world to teach people that they can't any longer fly around the world. That's an important mission. And if you agree with his ideas, then it is. Now, it has a certain internal contradiction because what it's recognizing is that to do anything, you need energy, including to oppose energy. But the real thing is to promote energy.
You save your voice in posing this question, but my brother is looking into getting into the natural gas industry.
Uh-huh.
So his question for you was, what's your projection for the growth of the natural gas industry with regard to public policy? It's very hard to predict, but what do you think the government's going to do with such an explosion?
Well, first of all, thank you for the concern about my voice. Yeah, can we wrap up after this?
Yeah.
Anyone, I'm free to hang out or talk afterwards, so anyone feel free to come up and talk, but it's easier for me to talk short distance than long distance. So, I mean, my projection, part of my projection would depend on, I have no specific like economic knowledge about the field and its potential. Obviously, it's booming due to fracking. My hope is that I and other people can help defend it, and therefore it'll become big, even bigger than it would otherwise be. It's a super exciting field, and it's just as a practical matter, it's cool that there's at least one field in America that hasn't been completely destroyed by regulation. I mean, it's much, and that field is so overregulated, and yet human ingenuity even managed to triumph over that. So I'm particularly sort of proud of that field in the sense of that they made this completely amazing breakthrough that goes against everything that the environmentalist movement would want, and they got away with it, and it's become so successful that it's been very hard to stop, except in the state of New York, where it's being completely stopped, and it's a very impoverished state, so it's insane, and they should definitely liberate it here. So those of you who are concerned about the local economy, this is definitely an issue to fight on. And with that, again, happy to talk after, but thanks for being a great audience.